one.
Okay, I'm just going to start the webinar. We've got it. Good afternoon, everyone. We will just give it about 30 seconds just to let everyone connect and see the numbers going up. So thank you so much for joining us today. Okay, the people are rapidly joining, so we're going to give it till, okay, we are 1 minute past, so let's kick off. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for our TCF 2.0 webinar this afternoon. About a month ago, for the launch of TCF 2.2, we did 2 webinars, one for the policy and another one for the technical changes. And then we're now doing a series of dedicated stakeholder webinars. So we are really excited to kick off our first one this afternoon, which is focused on vendors. And we are joined by, you can see, we've got a whole array of experts that are going to be helping us with the presentation today. We are live, so we are going to be, after the presentation, which we envisage will last about 30 minutes, we're going to be dedicating the remaining time for audience questions and answers. Now, if anyone has ever joined us before, you'll see that at the bottom of your screen is a little Q&A icon, so you can put any questions in there. It's really important that you do share your questions with us. We take all of these away and we update the FAQ document that we have to reflect anything that's missing from that. So I am now going to hand over to my colleague Gosha, who will walk you through the agenda and introduce our speakers for the afternoon. So over to you, Gosha.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Okay, so can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I would like to also welcome everyone who has decided to join us today. I would like also to introduce and welcome our speakers. Our speakers are the members of the TCF Policy Working Group, the group that has been working on the new version of the TCF. And our today's speakers are really active members of this group and are the experts when it comes to the TCF issues. So I would like to welcome Elena Turturnu from VIP Legal and Privacy Compliance from Adform, Rafael Marti, Head of Legal from ID5, Will Howard, Legal Counsel, Commercial Google, and our Legal Counsel, Peter Craddock, Partner at Keller and Heckman LLPP. I would also like to add here that our webinar is a little bit limited when it comes to its scope, because as Helen said earlier, we had 2 more general webinars that were focused on the general changes to the TCF policies and technical specifications. Both of them were recorded. And if you want to have more general overview for the changes, please go to our website and check them out. And so this webinar is focused on the changes applicable to vendors, and our experts are going to give you a very good overview for the changes that have been implemented by the new version of the TCF. Okay, so can I ask for the, yeah, thank you. Okay, so one more remark before we go through agenda. I would like also to say that the new version of the TCF focused mostly on the improvement of the information that are provided to the end user and to give them more control over the processing of the personal data. Okay, so we will start with the implementation timeline. Later on, our experts will explain more in details the changes applicable to vendors. The first one will be the removal of the legitimate interest for certain purposes. Next one is about the new purpose 11, standardization of new information about vendors. Also we are going to talk a bit more about the event listeners. At the very end, we will focus on the changes to the TCF compliance programs. And at the end of this presentation, we are going to have the Q&A session and we are going to answer to your questions live. If we are not able to answer to all your questions, after this webinar, we are going to prepare a special document that is going to contain all the questions, also the one that hasn't been answered here. So we will make sure that we are going to answer to all the questions, if not live, then later on the special document. So yeah, I think I can ask for the next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, so to start with, we released the new version of the TCF, version 2.2, on 16th of May. It contains the updates to the TCF policies, as well as technical specifications that were developed with the IAB Tech Lab as a cooperation. So the next one is the June 30th. The deadline is to update vendors' registration information, as the new TCF policies require more additional information that are going to be disclosed in the GVL, and all the vendors need to update the information through the GVL registration portal. The next date is the July 31st. It's about submitting the vendor compliance form, which we are going to focus later on when we are going to speak about the compliance programs. And the last one is the end of the implementation period, which is September 30th. And at this time, all vendors should implement the updated TCF policies and technical specification to their live installations. And also it is really important to underline that currently we have live 2 GVLs, one for the previous version of the TCF and one for the TCF version 2.2, which is public weekly. So the last version of the GVL, I mean for the TCF version 2.0, is going to not be available anymore after the September 30th. Okay, so I think it's that for the timeline. And now I would like to give the floor to our wonderful speakers. And I think it's the first one is Elena. So please, Elena, go ahead with the first slide.
Thank you very much, Gosia. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending where you are. I would like to, I think the next slide, Gosia, or who has the, yeah. So the first, and I think one of the most significant updates to this version of the TCF is the removal of the legitimate interest as legal basis for purpose 3, 4, 5, and 6. And why I mean this is one of the most significant changes is because vendors will not anymore be permitted to even choose consent, to choose legal basis as a, to choose legitimate interest, apologies, as a legal basis for these purposes, and like that is 3, 4, 5, and 6. And what these purposes are all about, it's basically vendors will not be permitted to rely on LI for the purpose of creating a personalized user profile, and then use that personalized user profile for purposes of delivering personalized ads and content. And where can that be done? So basically, when you go into the user UI of the vendor, like registration form within the TCF, you're going to see consent as the only legal basis to tick the box. So there is no flexible legal basis anymore, or legitimate interest legal basis. And why has this changed? Why did we made this change? That resides into in the APG's decision and sanction, where the Belgium litigation chamber essentially ordered the IAB Europe to prohibit the use of LI as a legal ground for processing by the organizations participating in the TCF in the respective back then version. And the same urge has been expressed in various iterations by other DPAs across the EU. So I think the listeners today would not be totally surprised why this change. I think what is to keep in mind is that the reliance on the legitimate interest will continue to exist under TCF for other purposes, about which I will elaborate in more detail later on. I think next one. Next slide.
Thanks,
no?
Elena.
No.
Hello.
Yeah, I
Thanks,
think too far.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah.
So you'll all be familiar with Purpose 2, which gives vendors permission to use more limited data to serve contextual or basic ads. This new Purpose 11, if you like, is the content equivalent of Purpose 2. So it permits vendors to select and deliver non-advertising content based on real-time data like page content, non-precise geolocation data, and it also permits activities like content rotation, frequency capping, that kind of thing. It cannot be used for creating personalized content profiles or selecting personalized content. Those activities still belong with Purposes 5 and 6 respectively. So if you like, with the addition of Purpose 11, we've now got a full suite of purposes that deal with both personalized and non-personalized content, much like we've always had Purposes 2, 3, and 4 that deal with personalized and non-personalized ads. And of course, it's worth calling out the health warning there in bold. You know, vendors should make sure they're mapping their processing activities to the TCF purpose taxonomies. And of course, there's, as always, there's the useful vendor guidance available in the TCF policies to help you do so. And to Elena's previous point about legitimate interest, this is legitimate interest or consent remains available to vendors to register flexibly for one or the other, as with the other purposes. I think I'm now moving on to Raphael. It's over to you to talk about standardization of, or to kick us off on standardization of vendor transparency information.
Thanks, Will, and hi, everyone. Vendors need to provide additional and detailed information about their data processing operations, and that information has to be disclosed to end users via the GBL and their CMPs or the publisher CMPs. For existing vendors that submit all new required information, they will be published in the GBL version 3, sorry. Version 2 of the GBL will run until the end of the implementation period. During that time, existing vendors can be published on both versions of GBL. For new vendors registering to TCF for the first time, they must submit all the additional information to be included in the GBL and also to be assigned an ID. And until the end of the transition period, new vendors will be published in the current version of the GBL, that's GBL version 2 and the new version. The idea behind this requirement is to increase transparency, allowing users to make more informed decisions about their data. Next slide, please. So TCF 2.2 has created a standardized taxonomy or classification system for the types of data that vendors commonly collect and process. These includes things like IP addresses, device characteristics, browsing data, user profiles. There are 11 categories in total, and vendors have to select and identify which of these categories they process as part of their TCF registration process. IAB has provided a dedicated vendor guidance for this. And once again, the idea here is to increase transparency and compliance with data protection regulations by standardizing the categories of data. It makes it easier to understand exactly what types of data are being collected and processed by end users and regulators. Next slide, please.
I think that is me, the data retention periods. The policy also introduces another layer of transparency with respect to the data retention periods on a per purpose basis. And what does this exactly mean? Basically, vendors will be required to disclose per purpose for how long in terms of days do they retain the data. And to give you an example, in a DMP, for example, that is like purpose 3, when you build up a user profile, essentially vendors would, our clients using a vendor's DMP, for example, would have a much shorter data retention periods than the data that is retained for purpose 7. That is like ad measurement, reporting, all of the data that you need behind, to calculate the success of a campaign, how in order, for example, to deduct whether there is any discrepancy on the delivery. Hence, I think, and the way it's going to look like, it's essentially in the vendor UI within the TCF. Vendors are required to declare the number of days. And where that will be shown, however, to the user, speaking about the transparency, it will be shown to the user within the CMP in the second layer and not in the first layer. And that, I think, it's an important detail, so that the CMP, the user CMP, or what is visible to the user is not within the user's choice, is not too full of information. And that the reason why it also resides from Belgium's APG's decision in forms of like comment to offer more the TCF, to render TCF compliant with more transparency and information under the GDPR Article 12, 13, and 14. And I think the next one, legitimate interest at stake. As mentioned at the beginning, legitimate interest will continue to exist as a legal basis that vendors can rely upon. And the purposes that are still valid to be relied upon on legitimate interest are purpose 2, 7, 8, 9, 10, and as mentioned by Will, 11. And the respective special purposes, some special purposes. Then the novelty and change here is that is introduced with this version, is that when vendors tick the box that this is legitimate interest, then they have to provide with a link about this reasoning on their website. And that link, how does that look like? It's left at the vendor's discretion, whether that explanation about why you rely on legitimate interest is going to be put into a separate dedicated page on your website, or it is going to be put into a privacy policy. That is left at full freedom of the vendors, and essentially is to have that explanation why you rely on legitimate interest for the respective purpose. And this change also resides from various criticism with respect to from the data protection regulations, supervisory authorities, that TCF was not providing sufficient transparency or enough transparency, and requiring controllers to provide more information about the legitimate interests they pursue.
Thanks, Lena. Next slide. Thanks, Gosia.
Thank you.
So yeah, one final thing to say on the standardization of vendor information, and following on there from what Elena was saying about GDPR transparency requirements and making things more accessible and easy for our users. Vendors will now declare in the GVL list the URLs to their privacy policies and legitimate interest explanations on a per language basis. So two obvious advantages for doing this. Firstly, CMPs can now present users with information in the user's own language. For example, either using the language of the site or app the user's visiting, or the language of the user's browser. And secondly, publishers themselves have more information and control to help them choose which vendors that they would like to work with. If, for example, they'd only like to work with vendors that provide the privacy documentation in the language of the users that they know visit their sites. I won't go into too much more detail on that one. I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but I will hand you over to Raphael. I think it's back to you now to talk about event listeners and communicating user choices to vendors.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. So this is a rather technical topic. So, or Peter, chime in if I miss anything about this slide. But the get EC data command, it's going to be deprecated. And this is a command that CMPs can use to retrieve TCF strings containing user choices for the processing of their personal data for different purposes. The event listener function is a command that communicates users' choices in real time to vendors without them having to call to retrieve these TCF strings. By using event listeners, vendors can ensure they are only processing user data when users gave their consent, helping them to better comply with data protection regulations. In the web environment, vendors with access to JavaScript will be required to register an event listener function instead of using the deprecated get TC data command. These, as I mentioned, reduces the number of calls that vendors need to make to the API to obtain the latest TC string. In app environments, SDKs provided by app vendors must be set up to monitor for changes in users' choices. So when choices are updated, the SDK should retrieve the updated TC string in real time for the persistent storage provided by the relevant platform. That could be iOS or Android. And that's it on event listeners, unless Ninon or Peter want to add anything.
I think we are good. Thank you, Rafael. Okay, so now we are going to talk a bit about the updated TCF compliance programs. Okay, together with the implementation of the TCF version 2.2, we decided to expand it and improved our compliance programs to make sure that the end users are informed correctly, and also to be sure that the TCF participants are in compliance with the TCF policies and technical specifications. And one of the new measures is a controls catalog, which is basically a list of the auditable elements that IAB Europe is basically checking to see if your live installation is in compliance with the TCF policies and technical specifications. So if you want to see if your live installation is in compliance with the policies and technical specification, you can just take a look, and I guess it should be really helpful for you to assess if it's correct or not. Also, the controls catalog contains the information which enforcement procedure will apply in case of the non-compliance. So each element is connected with the enforcement procedure. And here, I think it's really important to underline that one of the possible sanctions in case of tampering the TC string is immediately suspension from the global vendor list. So it's one of the new things that we have decided to implement. Also, as we said earlier, there is vendor compliance form that all vendors need to submit before July 31st. The compliance form allows us to see how you ensure the compliance with the TCF policies and technical specification. Also, you need to see to show how you read and retrieve the TC string, and all the forms are going to be audited by us. And in case that we see that there are some inconsistencies between the TCF policies or technical specifications, we will reach out to you to explain what is wrong. So I think that's all. I think now we can go to the Q&A. We received a lot of questions, and to Q&A, Peter Kradok and Ninon Wagner, our privacy director, will join. So let me see for the questions. Okay, first one is actually for the vendor compliance form, but there is no author. So I believe the notes say to upload as a Word doc, but the template is Excel. Okay, so apparently we have some small mistake on our website. The vendor compliance form is the Excel format, and we are required to upload it in an Excel format. So we will correct it. The next one is from Luke Pay. is the change in legitimate interest as a result of the Belgian DPA? So I think I will ask Nino maybe to answer this one.
Yeah, thank you, Gosia. So of course, there was in the decision from the APD from last year an analysis about the use of legitimate interest for certain purposes. So in particular, when it came to the reliance on legitimate interest for targeted advertising using the OpenRTB protocol, so the scope of this analysis was really limited. In this iteration of v2.2, the TCF instances have worked to actually remove the use of legitimate interest for purposes 3 to 6. So the scope is actually a lot broader than the decision from last year, and is actually more aimed at taking into account the recent EDPB guidelines. Well, not guidelines, but report from their cookie task force. That specifically flagged purposes relating to profiling as unlikely to be relied on legitimate interest. I'm not sure. Yeah, Peter, you want to answer this question? Or you want to add something?
Yes, I think in practice, you do have to bear in mind that obviously the decision was taken into account in the general assessment, but it's part of a broader reflection on where the TCF instance is, and so it's IAB Europe together with all of the members who are involved in these committees to try to see where do they want to take the TCF from now, and so this has been taken into account, but it was one part of the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, the next one, I think it will be to Elena. LI for purposes 3, 4, 5, and 6. Does it mean that it is allowed for the IAB vendors to collect legal basis outside the TCF for the purposes that exist within the TCF?
Yeah, so I mean, outside of the TCF, vendors can establish other legal bases, and that can be achieved essentially through proprietary integrations between publishers and vendors. So it depends on the relationship that publisher and a vendor establish.
Okay, thank you. The next one, I think it might be for Nino. Assuming not already covered earlier in the webinar, vendors don't need to support 2.2 until late September, but if publishers and CMPs start sending TC strings created with 2.2 before then, exempli gratia at the earliest of July 1st, how should vendors approach these strings if existing logic is expected 2.1 GVL and policy version, etc.? It seems like vendors will need to implement new logic for 2.2 ASAP, so they don't have to drop opportunities with 2.2 TC strings. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, so it's true that CMP can already start sending a TC string created under 2.2 after June 30, which is the day by which all vendors should have updated their TCF registration. In practice, we of course do not expect that all CMP will be ready by June 30. There is some additional work that needs to be made. And so as a result, vendors should be able to receive TC string with v2.2 already by that time if they do not want to meet Unity. However, an important factor is that there is no breaking change to the TC string format. So understanding the signal contained in a TC string, whether it be 2.1 or v2.2, as well, it's the same logic that needs to be applied. We added in the FAQ a specific question about how to make the distinction between a TC string that was created under 2.1 and 2.2. So the data point that needs to be looked at is the policy version in the TC string. If the policy version is below 4, it means that it was created under 2.1. If it's 4, it means that it was created under 2.2. And then again, the logic is exactly the same. A vendor will easily be able to assess which legal basis has been established by the CMP for its data processing purposes.
Okay, thank you. The next one might be to Peter. How does the prohibit of the use of legitimate interest for purposes 3, 4, 5 correlate with the vendor's role in the processing? I mean, if vendors are controllers, they can establish their own purpose of processing, test consent, but if the vendors are processors, they cannot have their own purpose of processing, so they rely on the publisher's instructions and determination of the purpose of processing. Therefore, if the publishers establish legitimate interest as a purpose of processing, what is the expected behavior of the vendors with TCF 2.2 registration?
So indeed, it's very important to understand that under data protection rules, the one who determines the purposes is the controller. Now, what you have with the TCF is you just have a taxonomy, a classification of purposes. And so every vendor, and it was mentioned during the presentation, it's up to every vendor to map what they are doing to the taxonomy that is included in the TCF policies. And so then, for instance, it might be that you have a specific label that you've chosen internally for a specific purpose. And that is a purpose that you have determined. But then you're basically mapping it to a classification. It's basically categories. And then you try to see, well, okay, this is the label that I'm going to be using for the processing activity that I manage on my own. And I'm just using that label, applying it to this processing activity that I manage. And so it doesn't change your classification. It shouldn't change. It is worth noting there is an ongoing case about this. And so the question of basically whether controllership, joint controllership is something that has been raised in the context of these proceedings regarding the Belgian DPA decision. And so that has nothing to do with 2.2 specifically. But so that is something where we expect to have more clarity as well in the coming months once the European Court of Justice takes its own position on the matter. But in terms of the principle itself, these are your processing activities as vendor. You determine them. What you are doing is you're choosing a label that is presented in this taxonomy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, so maybe just one thing to add on the practical side of things. So when vendor register to the TCF and they declare their data processing purposes as a data controller, when they act as a processor of the publisher, they need to follow the legal basis of their data controller. So the publisher, in relation to this particular, we have made no change to the the publisher TC segment, in the TC string. So it's a segment of the TC string that can be used by publisher to record their own legal basis as data controller. They can use either consent or legitimate interest for the using the TCF purposes nomenclature. As Peter explained, this classification, it's not covered the TCF policy, so publisher can do as they want in that respect.
Thank you very much, guys. Okay, the next one will be addressed to Will. New purpose 11 is restricted to consent or legitimate interest can be applied. Is already presented within the new registration form.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Gosh. I thought I covered it on the thing. Probably apologies if I didn't. Yes, it's a flexible basis. You could choose either consent or legitimate interest for purpose 11. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, the next one. Okay, I think it might be to Peter or Nino. Does collect include just transfer? Some vendor just transfer the string and information. Does this consider as collect?
In terms of, I don't know where to what the collect part references, what that references exactly, but in general, anything regarding the TCF is about recording user choices in relation to processing of personal data and of information more generally. And so what you have then is that it's about processing. Processing includes collecting, includes transferring, And so I think it would be useful if there's a specific aspect of collection that the person asking this question was referring to. It might be useful just to add that as an additional question, because otherwise collecting is a form of processing, transferring is a form of processing. And so presumably, I think in that context, everything was related.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, the next question. What is the new adequate TCF purpose for cookie singing processing activities? So I think it's again for Peter or Nino.
I think anyone could probably jump in, but cookie syncing is not in and of itself. It's I mean, it supports a data processing purpose. So you could do cookie syncing for measurement purposes, advertising purposes, and so on. So it really depends on the purpose that you pursue as a vendor. But happy to have anyone on the webinar jumping on that one.
I think it's important to always make the distinction between the fact that you are using something as a means of achieving something else, and cookie syncing is a means. Your purpose is what you are trying to achieve, and so you have this taxonomy, this nomenclature of different purposes that is included in the TCF. But when you're doing cookie syncing, it's not to do cookie syncing, it's to achieve something. And so identify why you're using that cookie syncing, and then try to see in your purposes, how do you map that to the ones in the classification in the TCF, and then you'll see which legal grounds you're also using in that context.
Okay, thank you. The next one, I think it's for Elena. For each purpose, what is the criteria considered to input data retention period? Does it only apply when consent is required, or shall it be added for all listed purposes with data retention equals 0 when not used?
So it is definitely for every single purpose. You have to declare the data retention for every single purpose. I just double checked it right now within the UI logged in for my vendor ID. So it's definitely, so you have to declare data retention for measure, advertising performance, and so on, which is purpose 7 and which is legitimate interest, for example. So you have to declare for, regardless of the legal basis, it is per purpose data retention per vendor.
Okay, thank you. The next one is addressed to Rafael. Is it now illegal to request the CMP partners to share the TC string with vendors?
Not the way I understand it. I think the TC string can still be shared across the ecosystem, but that could be subject to different interpretations.
Okay, the next one. Do existing vendors need to fill a compliance form, or does it apply to the new vendors? Or also the existing vendors need to fulfill the vendor compliance form. The deadline to do it is the 31st of July. So please submit it on time, because it's applicable to every vendor, not only for the new one, but as well for the existing one. Okay, unless Nino wants to answer some, add some more. Okay, so the next one, will downstream vendor who are reliant on receiving the TCF daisy bit by macro on the add tag be receiving either 2.1 or updated 2.2 daisy bit through September 30, depending on the CMP? Okay,
Maybe
go ahead.
Do you want me to take this one? So in the technical specification, we haven't changed anything in relation to the macros. So it's still the same nomenclature that are being used to pass the TC string to tags that have no access to JavaScript. So they will receive, like vendor will receive the TC string through this macro, whether it's 2.1 or 2.2 TC string, even after September 30, because TC string created under the version 2.1 will not be considered invalid after the deadline.
Okay, thank you. Are the slides presented available as documents for review? The webinar is recorded, so you will have the possibility to see the presentation again if you watch again the webinar. For now, I think we didn't think about just sharing the presentation as a separate document. So unless Nino wants to add something.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. We'll put the slide as well available for download if that helps.
Okay, so probably later on, as the recording will be uploaded to our website, the slides will also be possible to find there. Okay, can you provide link to description of new taxonomies? So taxonomy is a part of the new TCF policies. So if you go to our website and search for the new TCF policies, you will find, I think, if I remember correctly, please correct me if you know that it's different appendix, but I think it was Appendix A, Section G. So you will find there the taxonomy of data. You know?
Yes, so actually I'm checking which appendix it is, but I added the URL in the chat to the policy, and I think it's actually Appendix B. But you will find the new taxonomy of so the category of data, but also no, you are right actually, Gosia, it's Appendix A. So categories of data, stacks, purposes, and so on.
Okay, thanks. Okay, the next one actually might be again for you, Nino. When are the IAB libraries ready, TCF version 2.2 for Java and JavaScript?
So I believe the JavaScript library is almost ready because there are already been some contributor working on updating the library. So this is something that is also being managed by our partner IAB TechNet. I think we're still missing some contributor for the Java library. So of course, if someone wants to contribute to the update of this open library, feel free to reach out to us.
Okay, thanks. The next one, will the V2 vendor list updated with the changes we will make from now? You know?
Yeah, so I think you explained it at the beginning. So the vendor list V2 is going to stay the same with the exact same format, so that CMP can continue using that in their live installation with no issue. And all of the new information is published at a different URL. So the format is V3, and you can see all of this new information as a vendor progressively update their registrations. I mean, I'm going to put the URL as well, although I need to send it to Ellen because I cannot put URL in the chat myself, I think.
Okay, thank you. The next one, will TCF decoder library support version 2.1 as well when 2.2 is live? I mean, will it be backward compatible? I think, you know, you said something already about the library.
I'm just checking the. Yeah, yes, it works because there is no breaking change to the TC string format. There is only one thing in the TC string whose scope has been slightly extended. Is field So initially it was named non-custom stack, and it's now named non-custom text. So it is to flag when a publisher is using a certain customized text to present information to users, but there is no other changes to the TCF string, which means that it's completely backward compatible.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next one will be probably to Rafael. Could you please elaborate what is meant by an event listener?
So as I mentioned, the event listener function is a command that communicates users' choices in real time to vendors without them having to call to retrieve TCF strings every time they want to know what's the status of any TCF string, as it was the case with the get TC data command.
Basically, it's a technical capability that you can use in using basically web technologies and so on to have this continuous flow of information. And so it's not something that's been invented in the context of the TCF. This is an established technology, and it's just that it's being used as a means of ensuring this kind of real-time access to the choices that are being expressed. So if a person changes their choices midway, this information can be immediately basically consulted as well and taken into account.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, on the technical side, by retrieving the TCF string via JavaScript, when we already registered the event handler by TCF 2.1 specification, do we need to change something in the implementation? So I think maybe Nino.
So the answer is no. If you are, so it was already a recommended practice to use event listeners. So if you are following this existing recommending practice, you are already set for v2.2.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, the next one, how exactly can vendors self-check their live installation to verify compliance? Okay, so as we said, there is controls catalog that contains all the auditable elements that are required from vendors to implement their live installations. So if you use this document, you can see if something is missing at your installations. So there are the most important, let's say, parts that have to be implemented to your live installation. So this document will help to self-check if everything is okay, if you implement some changes. Okay, the next one, and it might be our last question. When you say the TCF version 2.1 is going to be deprecated on 30th September, what does it mean in practice? If publishers don't update their CMP, are they no longer going to be able to collect consent strings and distribute them to TCF vendors? How would that be enforced? Maybe Nino?
So yeah, so the TCF 2.1, sorry, will be deprecated on September 30, which means that after this date, we will no longer publish GVL version under the v2 format. The archives will remain available for vendors and CMP to read existing TCF 2.1 string. So it means that after this date, publishers need to have updated their CMP in order to create for their new users or users who return to the CMP to renew their choices and create TC string v2.2. In terms of enforcement, we will monitor proactively and regularly CMP live installation deployed on publishers' property to make sure that they have made the necessary changes by that date, well, after that date, rather.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we have enough time to answer for the last question. Okay, where can we find the vendor compliance form? So vendor compliance form is on the GVLA registration portal. So we need to log in and and see the vendor compliance form there to download and to submit later on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate all of the questions. I think in total, my colleague in the back end's been taking and copy and pasting all the questions. I think we had, well, gosh, you've been reading them out, but there's definitely about 30 odd questions there. So we will review those. Anything that's missing from the current FAQs, we'll make sure that document's updated. As Gosha said, we'll be sharing with everyone that registered for this webinar, we'll be sharing a copy of the deck and also the recording, but the recording will be up on our website now with the deck as well. And if there is anything else that you would like, any questions you have for any of the people involved with the TCF, you can email us at framework@iabeurope.eu, and I'll put that in the chat box. But a very big thank you to all of our excellent speakers today. So to Elena, to Raphael, to Will, Peter, Nina and Gosha, we really do appreciate you giving up part of your day to come along and host this webinar for us. And I hope everyone that attended found this really useful. And we wish you all the best with your implementation of TCF 2.0. Okay, thank you very much. Have a lovely afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.